as we saw here. And on that, you can see the raise hand button. So can I please ask you to all raise your hands up and down just to see that I can see that you can all hear me. Okay, good. I can start to see a few hands going up. Okay, great. There's a few more. Okay, thank you for that. If you can all now put your hands down, that would be great, and we will continue. Next, we have the microphone mute button. Initially, all of you will be muted. I will unmute you all at the end of the presentation when you can ask some questions. I would ask, though, that unless you are physically asking a question, that you remain muted. That just makes it easier for everybody else to hear and eliminates background noise. So that's the raise hand and the mute button. Next, we have the questions tab, which is a little bit lower down. For those of you who either don't have audio or would prefer to type your questions, you can type it in here into this spot. And just remember, when you have finished typing your questions, to hit the send button so that I can actually see the question coming up. Okay. Let's get started. Today we're going to be talking about the TruVsion Megapixel cameras from UTC Fire and Security Products. This is a brand new range of cameras, and the purpose of this webinar is to tell you about the camera's features and benefits and some of the applications for the megapixel cameras. So let's start off with an overview of the whole range. As you can hopefully see from the photo at the bottom, there are a total of 5 members of the family. They are available in both full body styles and in dome styles. All 5 cameras are H.264 compression, and they all use a 1/3 inch format sensor. They are available in 1.3 megapixel and 2 megapixel resolutions. All cameras are capable of dual streaming, and they all support multiple resolutions. They are all capable of local recording / alarm storage to a SDHC memory card, and they can also all be recorded with the TruVsion TVR60 hybrid recorder. All 5 cameras have got a composite video output for easy commissioning, and I will talk about that in the next slides. They can all do bidirectional audio, and all of them have the capacity for alarm inputs and outputs. Finally, all 5 cameras are capable of being powered either via 12 volts DC, 24 volts AC, or power over Ethernet if you use a suitable PoE-capable switch, such as that which is available from the new IFS transmission range of network switches. Okay, having covered that, let's get started into the details of each of the cameras. Okay. We start off with the 1.3 megapixel Vandal Dome. This is model number TVD, which stands for TruVision Dome -M1120 V-3-P. The M denotes megapixel. Now this is a progressive scan 1.3 megapixel camera utilizing a CCD sensor. It is supplied with a 3.3 to 12 millimeter varifocal auto-iris lens. The camera is a vandal-proof housing rated to an IK10 impact rating. The housing is also weatherproof to an IP66 rating. The camera can stream 1280 by 720p, which in real time, which is equivalent to high-definition television. It comes with a mechanical IR cut filter, giving it true day-night capability, which also means that the camera is compatible with infrared illuminators. Now, this camera supports the following resolutions. The full resolution, which is 1280 by 960, and that's at 12.5 images per second. 1280 by 720 at a full 25 images per second. Then we have 640 by 480 at 25 images per second. And these resolutions are on the mainstream. And on the substream, we can support SIF and QSIF. The camera has got built-in motion detection and privacy masking. Now, some of the applications for this style of camera, when you think about it, being a vandal-proof camera, it's quite well suited to car parks, petrol stations, ATM and bank foyers, loading docks, train and bus stations, underpasses and so forth, anywhere where vandalism or damage is likely. So that's the 1.3 megapixel Vandal Dome camera. Next, let's look at the 1.3 megapixel full body camera. Now this is the TVC-M1120-1-P. TVC stands for TruVsion camera as opposed to TVD, which was the TruVsion Dome. Now, like the Dome, this is a 1.3 megapixel CCD progressive scan sensor. The camera accepts either a C or CS mount lens. Note that the lens must be ordered separately. As far as the rest of the features, they are pretty much the same as the Dome camera. So 1280 by 720p real time, true day night capability. It supports the same resolutions. So 1280 by 960, 1280 by 720, 640 by 480, and SIF and QSIF on the substream. Now, being a full body camera, the applications are similar in that you can use it for retail, petrol station, bank foyers, city or traffic surveillance. The only proviso is that if you need to mount it outside, a suitable weatherproof housing will be required. Okay. We've now covered the 1.3 megapixel range, and we now move into the 2 megapixel range of dome cameras, of cameras. Starting off with the 2 megapixel indoor dome. This is part number TVD-M2110-2-P. Now this camera uses a 2 megapixel CMOS progressive scan sensor. It is supplied with a 2.8 to 11 millimeter varifocal lens. Like the 1.3 megapixel cameras, it does have bidirectional audio support via the browser. It can also provide 1280 by 720p real-time video. Now this camera is a lightweight, discrete indoor dome housing. It has a low light monochrome mode. Now importantly, this is an electronic day-night changeover. It is not an IR cut filter. This camera supports the following resolutions: 1600 by 1200 at 12.5 images per second, which is the full 2 megapixel resolution, 1280 by 720 at 25 images per second, 704 by 576 or 4SIF, which is the classical standard definition format, also at real time, and then we have 640 by 480, 2SIF, DSIF, SIF and QSIF on the mainstream, and SIF and QSIF on the substream. So you can see that this 2 megapixel camera has got a few more resolutions supported as opposed to the 1.3 megapixel. Like the others, it does have built-in motion detection and privacy masking. Applications for this camera: typically you would use this for offices, healthcare practices, retail environments, universities or schools. It is intended for indoor applications, and it is not intended for those areas where damage or vandalism is likely. If you do require a vandal-resistant camera, this is the next camera. This is the 2 megapixel Vandal Dome, part number TVD-M2110V-3-P. And again, the TVD stands for TruVsion Dome. The M is for megapixel, and the V at the end denotes that it is a vandal-resistant camera. Like the indoor dome, this is a 2 megapixel CMOS progressive scan sensor. However, this time we have a 2.7 to 9 millimeter varifocal lens. We also have a vandal-proof housing rated to IK10 impact rating, which is also IP66 weatherproof. And the rest of the features are similar to the indoor dome, so low light monochrome mode, and the same supported resolutions all the way from the full 2 megapixel resolution at 1600 by 1200 down to SIF and QSIF. Applications for this camera: similar to the 1.3 megapixel dome, where we're talking about car parks, petrol stations, ATM and bank foyers, loading docks, underpasses and so forth. Basically, again, anywhere where the risk of vandalism or damage exists, or in fact if you do have an outside location and you want a fully weatherproof camera. Okay, the last member of the family is the 2 megapixel full body camera. This is the TVC M2110-1-P. This is also a 2 megapixel CMOS progressive scan camera. It accepts C/CS mount lenses. At this point in time, we only accept manual iris lenses. The rest of the features are common to the other 2 megapixel domes, so bidirectional audio, 1280 by 720p real-time video, low light monochrome mode, and the same supported resolutions, so all the way from 1600 by 1200, which is the full 2 megapixel resolution, down to 4CIF, CIF, and QCIF. Typical applications: indoor, this camera could be used without a housing. If you're looking at outside applications, then you would need a suitable weatherproof housing. Okay, so we've now covered all 5 members of the new megapixel range family from UTC Fire and Security. Now let's look at some of the key features and benefits that are common to all 5 members. All cameras are capable of dual streaming. Now the main benefit of that is that you can configure the one stream for recording on a local network or on a local subnet at full resolution, full frame rate, and you can configure a second stream at a lower resolution for live viewing at a remote location to minimize the bandwidth that's necessary. All of the cameras use the latest H.264 compression for maximum video quality at the lowest bandwidth. Now, I mentioned earlier that the cameras have got an analog monitor output, which makes it particularly easy to set up the field of view and focus. Now, why is that? With all IP cameras, whenever you stream the camera, there is always a little bit of latency. Now, it varies. Some cameras are better than others. Nevertheless, there is always a little bit of a time lag between when something happens in front of the camera to when you actually see it either on the web browser or on the camera client program. Now, if you're trying to adjust the camera to get focus that's really, really sharp, or to adjust the field of view, particularly when you're focusing, that by the time you see the image ultra sharp on your monitor while streaming the digital output, you have actually already gone past it with the lens. So then you need to go backwards and forwards ever so slowly to get the camera just in ultra sharp. With an analog monitor output, you do not get the same latency, so it just makes it easier to get the really sharp focus. Local recording to SD card. The main benefit of that is that if you insert a suitable SD card up to 16 gigabytes, you can have local storage in the event of a network failure, and you can also schedule local recording at the camera on motion or alarm. So in fact, you could use the camera as a single channel high resolution DVR. The only catch is that you can only view the footage via the built-in web browser at this point in time. Nevertheless, with up to 16 gigabytes of storage, that can give you several hours of video. And if you do have a network failure, you would hope that the network can be restored within that period of time. Okay, we support multiple resolutions. This gives us flexibility in that we only need to stream the image size that we actually require for our application. If we don't need to view the full megapixel resolution at the remote client, we can stream, say, at QCIF or CIF. Next, low light performance. All 5 of these cameras use a 1/3 inch sensor. Now, 1/3 inch size format is larger than the 1/4 inch sensor that's used by other cameras in the marketplace. And all other things being equal, a 1/3 inch sensor is simply capable of capturing more light by virtue of its bigger size, and that just means we do get better low light performance. On top of that, the 1.3 megapixel cameras are a true day-night camera, so may be used with dedicated IR illumination devices, or whether they're halogen or LED based. The 2 megapixel cameras have a low light monochrome mode, which does reduce the noise in the picture. built-in motion detection and privacy masking. Privacy masking is particularly useful in either banking or retail applications where you may want to mask out sensitive areas such as the PIN pad on an ATM or the FPOS terminal at a cash register. On the 2 megapixel cameras, we have digital pan-tilt zoom, which allows us to navigate within the image to display areas of interest in full resolution to see all the details. Now, why is that important? If you think about it, most computers today running Windows, the monitors run at either 1280 by 1024 or 1024 by 768 resolution. So in fact, with a typical computer, you could not display a 2 megapixel camera at full resolution. We have a model for every application, whether we need an indoor application or an outdoor vandal-resistant application as needed. There is a model in the TruVsion camera megapixel range for each application. And finally, we can record these megapixel cameras with the TVR60. Now the TVR60 has got up to 12 terabytes of onboard storage, and we can record up to 8 1.3 megapixel cameras per unit in real time. TV and 4D and UltraView support is due around the middle of 2011. So in summary, we are talking about a professional high-performance megapixel range that delivers high image quality and flexible bandwidth usage. Okay, we've now covered the details, the features and benefits that are specific to this camera range. So now let's take a look at some of the benefits that are common to megapixel cameras in general. Now, first of all, higher resolution. Because of the higher pixel count, we can see much more detail when zooming. You know, by comparison, a standard definition forcive camera has approximately 440,000 pixels. So if we look at a typical image, if we zoom in with a normal resolution camera, you see here, and we're zooming into this area, the image becomes very, very pixelated. If we do the same zoom with a megapixel camera, we can actually see much more detail. Now think back to Australian standard AS 48006. Now this standard specifies the minimum image size recommended for typical applications, whether we're talking about crowd control, as in here, whether we're talking about intrusion detection, face recognition, or face identification. Now note, this standard was written around using a monitor with 400 TV lines of resolution. Because we have a much higher resolution available from a megapixel camera, we can actually see this level of detail even with smaller image size, or smaller percentages of the image size. In other words, we can have a wider field of view with a megapixel camera, and yet we can still see this level of detail. Okay. Now to put this into context, because we can see much more detail, we can actually use a single megapixel camera to replace multiple standard definition cameras and provide the same resolution. In this example, we can see that if we were to use 4 megapixel cameras, sorry, 4 standard definition cameras, each one with standard forcive resolution, if we wanted to ensure a particular number of pixels per degree of field of view, you can see that we can use a single 2 megapixel camera to give us the same coverage, and we still get exactly the same resolution and the same level of detail. Just to show this once again, we see here in the center where we have a classical view with a standard resolution camera, standard analog camera. To give us that field of view, we would need a 4.5mm lens to provide this view of the car park. Now, if we replace this camera with a 1.3 megapixel camera, for example, we can have a wider field of view. Therefore, we can use a wider angle lens, and yet we can still provide the same total resolution simply because we have many more pixels to play with. So that should give you some idea of what I mean by replacing multiple analog cameras with a single megapixel camera. It does show that we can actually lower the total installation cost because we no longer need to install 4 camera housings. We no longer need to run 4 sets of cables, 4 power supplies. We can simply mount 1 camera. Okay, I talked earlier about higher resolution. Let's do a bit of a comparison of what we actually see. Here we see a QSIF image. QSIF is 176 by 144 pixels. On the right we see it shown in actual size. And now this is what we see if we were to blow up a QSIF image to full size, full screen. You can see we have 2 cars in the field of view, but we can't really make out any details. Next, let's take a SIF image. SIF is 352 by 288. This is a SIF image actual size, and here is the same SIF image blown up to full screen size. Now we can start to see a little bit more detail. Nevertheless, we still can't really identify either the car or the number plate. Next, let's move on to full SIF. This is a full SIF image in real size. Now, full SIF, as a refresher, is 704 by 576. So you can see we can now make out that the car on the right is a Ford of some description. Nevertheless, we can't really quite see the number plate very well. You can see here that we start to see the letters, but we can't really make them out. So now by comparison, let's look at a megapixel image. Here is a megapixel image that's been cropped to fit the 4:3 size of the slide. And all of a sudden, look how much more details we see. We can see that the car on the right is definitely a Ford. We can make out the number plate. We can see that there's a B on the right. And for those of you who've been to Europe would see that that means the car is registered in Belgium. Likewise, on the left, we see that now this is a Volkswagen. We can make out the number plate perfectly, and we can see that there's also a Belgian car, and we can even see a little plush rabbit in the back window. So this level of detail is something that simply is not visible with a standard resolution camera. So now that we've seen the benefits of megapixel cameras, let's look at some of the applications. Crowd control. Particularly useful in retail environments, sports venues, airports, and education. You can identify potential suspects. In an educational situation, you might be able to recognize earlier a particular person that should not be allowed on the premises, or somebody that has been black banned from a shopping center. This level of detail is simply not possible with standard resolution cameras. It also gives you the possibility to go beyond security. With appropriate recording, with appropriate review, you could actually use a megapixel camera to pick up details in a retail environment. For example, what products were the customers looking at? How long were they were looking at for? Did they end up putting the product back on the shelf? Did they buy it? Next, as we said earlier, identifying faces. In automotive situations, car parks, traffic surveillance, petrol stations, we can provide additional details on the vehicle, including make and model, rather than it's just a blue sedan. We can make out number plates. This is particularly useful for petrol stations where we have the incidence of drive-offs, where people take petrol but don't pay for it. Now, we mentioned earlier that we can record the TruVsion Megapixel cameras with the TruVsion TVR60. Here we have a system performance guide which tells us what's possible. The TruVsion TVR60 is a 24-channel recorder. Up to 16 of these channels may be IP cameras if we use standard definition cameras, or up to 8 IP megapixel cameras. So you can see here, hopefully, that if I want to record IP cameras at the standard resolution, I can record up to 16. If I wanted to record cameras at 1.3 megapixel resolution, I can have up to 8 channels. If I want to record at 2 megapixel resolution, I can have up to 4 cameras. But remember, with all of the TruVsion Megapixel cameras, you can choose the resolution, whether you want to stream it at the full resolution or at a lower resolution. So in fact, you could have up to 8 2-megapixel cameras and record them only at the 1.3 megapixel / 720p resolution. So this gives us a fair degree of flexibility. And you see here at the bottom the typical bandwidths that are used by the cameras. So the maximum bandwidth is up to about 4 megabits per second. Okay. Now let's look at some of the accessories. I mentioned earlier that the megapixel full body cameras require lenses. We also now have available a range of megapixel lenses that are suitable for these cameras. We have a range of 1.3 megapixel lenses in 5 to 50 millimeter focal length in both auto iris and manual iris. And we have a range of 3 megapixel lenses in 2.8 to 8 millimeter. And finally, there are 2 lenses rated at 3 megapixels which are day-night capable. In other words, IR corrected. All of these lenses are 1/3 inch format, and they are all available in either a auto iris or in a manual iris variant. Now, something really critical on the use of lenses with megapixel cameras. Traditional lenses, as used for standard analog cameras, are rated up to about 500 or 600 lines of resolution. Now, while there is no mechanical reason why you couldn't put one of those lenses on a megapixel camera, you will nevertheless not be able to achieve the full resolution, because if you do so, the lens becomes the limiting factor. The picture will be soft and fuzzy at full resolution. Therefore, it is imperative that a suitable megapixel lens is used on a megapixel camera. So if you're using a 1.3 megapixel camera, you would need a lens that's rated for 1.3 megapixels as a minimum. If you need a 2 megapixel camera, then you would pick the 3 megapixel rated lens. Now, there is no problem with using a 3 megapixel lens on the 1.3 megapixel camera. However, you should be careful if you want to use the 1.3 megapixel lens on the 2 megapixel cameras. Now, if you're going to be streaming that camera at, say, 720p, then it's not a problem. But if you do need to stream the camera at the full 2 megapixel resolution, then you really want the 3 megapixel lens. Next, to build up a network, we have available the full range of IFS network switches in both fast Ethernet and full gigabit. Now, we talked about the IFS network switches in a webinar last year. For those of you who missed it or would like additional information, please send me an email and I will provide you with the information. Now, most of these network switches have got optical fiber uplink capability, which brings us to the IFS optical fiber transmission range. Now, this is something that was also covered in a webinar last year. And then just to recap, we have available the full range of IFS optic fiber transmission equipment. And again, those of you who missed the webinar on this topic last year, please drop me an email and I can provide you with all the information that you need. Okay, would you like to know more? More information, including brochures and data sheets, may be found on our website, which is www.alarmcorp.com.au, and on the UTC security website, which is still www.gesecurity.com.au. I would invite you to subscribe to the Alarm Corp Pulse, in which case you will receive new product information automatically. And you can do so by registering online with www.alarmcorp.com.au. If you do register, you can also get full access to our e-commerce platform, which includes seeing your own customized pricing as well as being able to place orders online, and that is possible to do 24 hours a day. If you would like to contact your nearest Alarm Corp representative, we have Ed Savaris in Queensland, and you can see his email address, ecs@alarmcorp.com.au, and his mobile number. We have Bob Graham in New South Wales, bbg@alarmcorp.com.au, and we have Stephen Dinger, who is responsible for Victoria, South Australia, and West Australia. or if you like, you can contact myself directly, Piotr Tolecki. I'm the product manager for the video surveillance product, and there is my direct mobile number and my email address. So thank you for your time, and I will now open it up to questions.
Right, how's it go?
Alrighty. Alright.
Okay, now if you can still hear me, I will still be available for however long you need to ask whatever questions you may have. Now, those of you who do not wish to use audio, please remember that you can drop down the... Now, here we go. We have the first questions. Okay, the first question is, are you going to send out price lists? The Alarm Corp price list is being updated right now to add the megapixel cameras, and that will be available from my colleagues Ed, Bob, and Stephen shortly. So please contact your nearest Alarm Corp representative, and they should be able to provide you with the pricing. Okay, is that a sufficient answer? Okay, next questions. Okay, the question is, why is there no AI auto iris lens capacity on the larger 2 megapixel body camera? The answer to that is the design of the camera at this point in time, and with being a CMOS camera, the focusing becomes quite critical. So being able to use a manual iris lens means you can actually close down the iris to get you the necessary field of view, as hopefully you know. With any camera, the field of view depends on the iris opening. At narrower iris openings, the field of view is deeper, and at wide iris openings, it is very shallow. So using a manual iris lens on this camera gives you a extra degree of control. And also, being a CMOS camera, the dynamic range is typically a bit wider, so there is less of a need for an auto iris camera. Okay, any more questions? Okay, in that case, let me just show you one more thing. For those of you who haven't yet registered on the Alarm Corp website, I would invite you to do so now. For all new registrations received during February, you will receive an additional 10% off your first e-commerce purchase during February, excluding any currently discounted specials. So again, please go to alarmcorp.com.au and click on Create Account. Okay, next question. How many megapixel cameras can the network switch support? That will really depend on which switch you pick. Some of the full gigabit switches have a throughput of up to 68 gigabits per second, whereas some of the smaller capacity switches have got a throughput of only a few gigabits per second. Either way, though, each camera can only put up to a maximum of about 4 megabits per second. So even with a 24-port switch, each one putting 4 megabits per second, you would not exceed the throughput rating of a switch. Okay, any more questions? Okay, at the moment we have had, I think, a total of 4 questions, so okay. Oh, here's another one. Okay, if you have a 24-port power over Ethernet switch, will it support all the cameras in PoE mode? The answer is yes. Uh, all of the IFS network switches can provide full PoE power per PoE port. So up to, I think, 15.4 watts is the maximum PoE rating. So all of the PoE capable IFS switches can provide full PoE power per camera. So in other words, if you have a 24-port PoE capable IFS switch, it can provide full PoE power to 24 connected cameras. And that's actually something that's worth pointing out, is that not all PoE switches in the marketplace can provide full PoE power on each and every single port. And if you are designing a network, that's something that is worth checking and testing. Okay. Okay, the next question is, can we cascade multiple network switches so that we can configure remotely? There is a stackable switch in the IFS switch range where you can stack up to 16 of these devices together to produce a single virtual switch with up to 384 ports, and then that single stacked switch can be administered as a single device. Okay. The question is, with the G gigabit switches, can you concatenate the backbone to double the backbone width? The answer is yes. On most of the models that are managed with the optic fiber or gigabit uplinks, you can do that. But I believe that's only on the managed switches that where you can actually get in and configure the switch. Next question, do we have a hardened switch that can support temperatures of up to 70 degrees Celsius? Yes, we do. There are 2 or 3 switches in the range that are hardened to be used in high temperature environments. So if you do have an application such as in a roadside cabinet for traffic monitoring, or in a industrial environment where the plant room or the equipment cabinet is not air conditioned, there is a suitable network switch for use in such an environment. And those are available in a 5-port and I think an 8-port version. If you need any data on the network switches, particularly with regard to the hardened devices, like I said earlier, please send me an email, pld@alarmcorp.com.au, and I can send you the relevant data sheets. Okay, are there any more questions? I'm here as long as you need me. As long as you keep asking questions, I am quite happy to keep answering them.